a publisher. And under any reasonable understanding of United States law, they are not somebody who broke in and stole data from the government and then published it. They're just somebody who received it and then allowed it to be published in the same way a newspaper would be allowed to publish information that it received from a confidential source. In fact, newspapers do routinely receive confidential and classified and top secret classified data from confidential sources and publish it online. That doesn't mean the government is happy about that, but we as a society have decided that we believe the First Amendment rights of publishers to publish information online is more important to us than occasionally making than the downside of having our government be a little bit embarrassed or unhappy about something that got published. I was heartened to learn that the State Department doesn't believe that anyone was injured as a result of these publications, and it's reminiscent of the Pentagon Papers case, in which Daniel Ellsberg and the New York Times published a huge amount of classified information, higher classification actually than what WikiLeaks has published in the New York Times, and of course the government fought it at that point as well. What came out of that was this real clear understanding that when it comes down to a publisher's right to speak freely, we have to uphold them at the highest standards, and under no cases can the government stop a publication like that from taking place, except under the most dire of circumstances, which they certainly were not. And that's this term called prior restraint, which we now have. The idea that the government can't stop a publication from taking place. So I think it'll be very interesting indeed to see what, if anything, they really try to pin on Julian Assange. I am not up to date with his case in Sweden because that doesn't seem like a traditional civil liberties issue. But as far as whether or not they did, if they tried to bring him to the U.S. and try to extradite him and put him up on charges, I'd be very curious as to their legal arguments around that.
Interesting. So what do you think is going to happen with privacy in the future? I mean, do you think that we're going to see fundamental changes in how privacy is approached in society, or what do you think the future holds? If you had a crystal ball, what do you think you'd see?
Well, I think we're starting to see those first early trends, which are huge integrations of different data sets. So the idea that this tiny piece of your life is no longer cabined away from all these other data sets. The complete destruction of data. The sort of the end of the destruction of data. So this idea that data, once it's out there, not ever going away. The corporate ownership of data becoming an increasing problem, where companies themselves are the weak point that the government can lean on to get access to sensitive consumer data. And then the question really is, these are all dire scenarios. I mean, let's be frank here. What can we do about it? And are people going to rise up and say, this is too much and we need to have some mechanism to better protect ourselves? And I think historically we haven't gotten to that point yet. Certainly we've seen online activism take off a little bit, but we haven't seen it in the privacy world. So I'd like to think that one of the things we could see is sort of this idea that encryption technologies and the ability to safeguard your data by actually implementing technical barriers for it to being intercepted become easy to use for regular people and prevalent and strong enough to withstand the government snooping or corporate snooping. That to me seems in some ways, a little bit of an easier battle than rolling back some of the terrible laws that have been passed in the last year, or in the last 10 years. So I'd certainly like to focus a lot of efforts on making it much easier and simpler for individuals to access and use encryption technology, get companies to sort of be good actors, to compete on privacy, to be like, you use our services, you don't have to worry about your privacy because we're going to respect it, and to get and to hopefully stop any other privacy invasive legislation from getting on the books. There's also the potential to roll back some poor privacy practices in lawsuits by going through the court systems. So those are some options available.
Thank you. So the final question that I've got for you, Rainey, is the students who are viewing this video, most of them will be finishing their degree within the next 18 months or so. They're in their 4th and 5th years at Waterloo. We have co-op, so they do 5 years to get their degree. So as they go out into the workforce, or they go on and do a master's degree, is there any advice that you'd like to give them? Something that, guidance that might help them as they go into move on in their lives and have to deal with privacy issues?
Well, there's always the idea that, so we all kind of enter into the workforce, early on in stages, but many people over the course of their lives will get into positions of certain power within a company or within a regulatory branch of the government or what have you, where you have the ability to make decisions about whether to respect free speech, whether to respect privacy, whether to respect individual choice in your corporate decision making. And sometimes those choices aren't always easy, but if you spend some time thinking through the ramifications of it, you can sort of have a clear understanding of, well, it's a complex issue, but if we do it this way, we'll be making a product that's a little bit more privacy friendly. Or if we establish this policy, we might have to put up with some things we don't like, but ultimately we'll be creating an environment that harbors free speech in a way that's creating the kind of long-term environment we'd like to. Increasingly, people coming into the workforce are getting jobs that are online or are technology focused, or even if they move into like a government or a regulatory position, they're dealing with these technical issues. And so if you head in that direction, I would just strongly urge you to not underestimate the long-term impacts of the decisions you're making, even if they seem smaller now, because what happens is every day tech companies and regulators are making choices about where they're going to draw their lines in the sand as far as civil liberties go. And creating an environment now that upholds freedom of speech and upholds privacy and upholds innovation can create a sort of a long-term expectations of those things for future generations of internet users. So that's my advice for everybody out there today.
Thank you, Rainey.